The thunderstorm had been relentless, pounding the small farm outside Cedar Falls with sheets of rain that turned the backyard into a maze of puddles and rushing water. When morning finally broke, clear and golden, retired police officer Tom Bradley led his German Shepherd Rex outside for their usual morning routine, expecting nothing more than the dog's typical patrol of their 5-acre property. What Rex discovered near the flooded creek would transform both their lives in ways Tom could never have imagined. The call started as Rex's usual alert bark, but quickly shifted to something Tom had never heard before: a high, anxious whine mixed with gentle whimpers. Following the sound to the far edge of their property, Tom found his 4-year-old German Shepherd standing perfectly still beside what remained of a destroyed duck nest, his massive frame tense with concern. Scattered in the mud around the nest were 7 tiny, bedraggled ducklings, no more than a day or 2 old. Their yellow down was matted and dirty, and they moved with the weak, unsteady wobble of babies in distress. One wasn't moving at all. Rex, who had been trained in search and rescue during his years with Tom on the police force, seemed to understand immediately that these tiny creatures needed help. As Tom approached, he watched his dog carefully lower himself to the ground, positioning his body to block the wind from the shivering ducklings. "Easy, Rex," Tom murmured, kneeling beside his partner. "Let's see what we can do here." The sight that greeted him was both heartbreaking and miraculous. The ducklings, driven by instinct to seek warmth and safety, had already begun pressing themselves against Rex's thick coat. The German Shepherd, despite every instinct that should have made him see these small birds as prey, or at least objects of chase, remained motionless except for the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. Tom gently gathered the 6 living ducklings, their tiny bodies barely filling his cupped palms. As he moved toward the house, Rex rose and followed closely, his dark eyes never leaving the bundle in Tom's hands. The 7th duckling, still and cold, was buried with quiet reverence under the old apple tree. In the kitchen, Tom set up an emergency brooder using a cardboard box, soft towels, and a heating lamp left over from his late wife's attempts at raising chickens years ago. As he worked, Rex positioned himself beside the makeshift nest, his alert ears tracking every tiny peep and movement. "You know these are birds, right?" Tom asked his dog with a gentle smile. "Not puppies." Rex responded with a soft huff and settled into what Tom recognized as his protective stance. The same position he'd taken when guarding evidence at crime scenes or watching over lost children during search operations. By evening, it was clear that Rex had appointed himself the duckling's guardian. He refused his dinner until Tom placed his food bowl beside the brooder, and he spent the night lying next to the box, occasionally lifting his head to check on the sleeping babies. The next morning brought the first real test of their unusual arrangement. The ducklings had grown stronger overnight, and their peeping had become more insistent. When Tom opened the brooder to check on them, they immediately began climbing toward the edge, their tiny claws scrambling for purchase. Rex, who had been watching intently, carefully nosed one adventurous duckling back into the box. When it immediately tried to climb out again, Rex did something remarkable. He began to herd them. Using the same gentle but firm techniques he'd learned for crowd control, but modified with incredible precision for creatures no bigger than golf balls. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom muttered, watching his German Shepherd carefully guide the ducklings back to safety with nudges so gentle they barely ruffled their downy feathers. As days passed, the bond between Rex and his adopted family strengthened in ways that amazed everyone who witnessed it. The ducklings, now christened with names like Puddles, Splash, Wadsworth, Quackers, Pip, and Sunny, had imprinted on Rex as surely as if he were their biological mother. They followed him everywhere, their tiny legs working frantically to keep pace with his measured steps. Rex, understanding their limitations, had adjusted his entire routine. His morning patrol of the property became a careful, slow procession with frequent stops to allow his charges to rest. His powerful bark, which had once commanded respect from criminals, softened to gentle rumbles when addressing his ducklings. The most touching moments came during rest periods. Rex would settle in a sunny spot in the yard, and the ducklings would immediately converge on him, climbing onto his back, nestling against his sides, and even perching on his head. His thick double coat provided perfect insulation, and his steady breathing created a rhythm that seemed to soothe the babies into peaceful sleep. Tom's neighbor, veterinarian Dr. Sarah Chen, stopped by frequently to check on the unusual family. "Never seen anything quite like this," she admitted. watching Rex carefully position himself to create shade for the sleeping ducklings on a particularly warm afternoon. He's demonstrating every maternal behavior except nursing. The feeding routine became a choreographed dance. Tom would scatter duckling food on the ground, and Rex would lie down nearby, creating a safe perimeter. The ducklings would venture out to eat, while Rex watched vigilantly for any signs of danger hawks overhead. Cats in the distance, or even butterflies that might startle his charges. When it was time for their first swimming lesson in Tom's old watering trough, Rex's anxiety was palpable. He paced the perimeter of the small pool, whining softly as each duckling took to the water with natural grace. When Pip, the smallest, seemed to struggle with a piece of floating debris, Rex actually stepped into the shallow water himself, carefully using his muzzle to clear the obstacle. "You know, you're not actually a duck, right?" Tom asked his dog, who responded by shaking water from his coat and immediately resuming his poolside vigil. Visitors to the farm were enchanted by the sight of the massive German Shepherd with his tiny convoy. Children from the neighborhood began stopping by regularly, their delighted laughter mixing with the soft peeping of the ducklings and Rex's contented rumbles. But it was Rex's protection instincts that truly showcased the depth of his devotion. When a hawk circled overhead one afternoon, Rex immediately positioned himself over the ducklings, his body creating a living shield while he tracked the predator with intense focus. When the neighbor's cat wandered into the yard, Rex issued a low, authoritative warning that sent the feline retreating without disturbing his sleeping charges. As weeks passed and the ducklings grew into awkward teenagers with emerging flight feathers, their relationship with Rex evolved but never diminished. They learned to fly in stages, first managing short hops, then longer glides, always returning to their protector for reassurance and rest. The day Wadsworth achieved true flight was both triumphant and terrifying for Rex. Tom watched as his dog followed the circling duck with intense concentration, his body tense with worry until Wadsworth landed safely beside him, immediately pressing against Rex's leg in their familiar gesture of affection. Tom realized that Rex had given him something he hadn't even known he needed. After his wife's passing 2 years ago, the house had felt too quiet, too empty. Now it was filled with life, purpose, and a kind of joy that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with animals in the first place. The ducklings, now fully grown, had become permanent residents of the farm. They had learned to forage independently and could fly freely, but they always returned to Rex each evening, settling around him for their nightly ritual of companionship and protection. Local news crews began featuring their story, dubbing Rex the world's most unusual mother duck. But for Tom, watching his faithful partner gently groom a duck's feathers or carefully position himself to block a cold wind, the story was simpler and more profound. It was about love without boundaries, protection without expectation of return, and the way certain souls recognize each other, regardless of species. Rex had found his calling not in police work or guard duty, but in the patient, devoted care of creatures who needed him completely. As autumn painted the farm in brilliant colors, Tom often found himself sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching Rex and his duck family settle in for the night. The German Shepherd would position himself carefully, allowing each duck to find their preferred sleeping spot, some against his warm flank, others tucked under his chin, one always perched on his back like a feathered crown. In those peaceful moments, with the soft sounds of contented animals and the whisper of wind through the trees, Tom understood that sometimes the most extraordinary families are the ones that form naturally, born not of blood or breeding, but of need, love, the simple recognition that we all, regardless of our differences, just want to belong somewhere safe and warm. Rex had given 7 abandoned ducklings exactly that hand in return. They had given him a purpose that fulfilled his protective heart in ways his previous career never could. Their friendship had indeed melted hearts throughout the community, but more importantly, it had created a family bound not by species, but by the deepest kind of love, the kind that asks for nothing and gives everything.